Hello, and welcome to your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Services Rochester Area Podcast. My name is Jan Heineman, and today I'll be reading to you from the Rochester Beacon. Our first story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Aiko Levick and is dated July 29th. For unhoused population, extreme heat can be life-threatening. Rochester recorded temperatures in the 90s this July, and for people living without shelter, extreme heat can be more dangerous than winter cold, advocates for the unhoused say. Amy D'Amico, founder of Rochester Grants Pass Resistance, an organization that supports unhoused people, says extreme heat can exacerbate current existing health problems. Certain illicit and legal medications can make people more sensitive to heat, while other drugs may degrade in high temperatures. While some individuals can stay in emergency shelters, D'Amico says it isn't feasible for a large portion of the unhoused population. Many shelters reject those with County Department of Human Services sanctions, which a person can get for missing an exemption form or a DHS appointment. Without a permanent residence, D'Amico says, individuals often miss appointments simply because their reminder letters are mailed to addresses they cannot check daily. Securing accommodation at a shelter is often more challenging for couples, pet owners, those struggling with substance abuse, and individuals who are queer or disabled. The city's extreme heat plan, created by the Office of Energy and Sustainability to combat the effects of climate change, identifies homeless individuals as a vulnerable population. One EHP initiative, the Cool Sweep program, aims to help both housed and unhoused people by providing public access to cool locations, such as air-conditioned buildings and swimming pools around the city when temperatures reach 85 degrees. However, the EHP notes several gaps in access, including that the most vulnerable populations may be unaware of the program, and that there is no coverage on Sundays and some evening hours. Aside from the Cool Sweep, EHP initiatives include extreme heat preparation and education before high temperatures are expected, and National Weather Service advisories and warnings during heat waves. The EHP mentions distributing extreme heat preparedness kits. While warnings may be beneficial to the general public, they're unlikely to help a person with no place to stay, advocates for the homeless say. Gary Harding, a founder of Recovery All Ways, a nonprofit organization that supports unhoused people, appreciates the EHP, but believes that it is currently insufficient. Harding questions how someone experiencing homelessness would be made aware of the Cool Sweep program, whether they could reasonably travel to the cool locations, and whether they would be allowed there. For those folks that are really battling or experiencing mental health issues, are they even going to be allowed in some of those spaces? Harding says. Generally speaking, he says, if someone is having an episode or in psychosis, they're not going to be allowed to stay. The EHP itself notes this issue, stating, the homeless community is most likely not welcomed due to how they appear and potential mental health challenges. Harding also worries that some unhoused individuals may hesitate to go to a cooling location, even if they could access one, for fear of judgment, but he believes it is still helpful to encourage people to go inside. D'Amico shares similar thoughts, saying that a short conversation urging an unhoused person to go to the library on a hot day could be life-saving. She explains that giving people cash is also effective because it could allow them to go into an air-conditioned store. While some might use the money to buy drugs, D'Amico points out that it could treat withdrawal symptoms and allow them to feel well enough to enter a public establishment. Unfortunately, she says, they're not all going to get clean today just because you think it's a good idea. It's really about reducing harm. Those who wish to help can also hand out frozen water bottles or electrolyte-rich beverages. Harding says someone may be panhandling in the heat because they're thirsty, and giving them a drink might help them find a cooler location. Although giving money and drinks to an unhoused person can help them, both Harding and D'Amico recognize that it isn't always feasible to do so. They encourage people to have conversations with homeless community members, even if they cannot give them anything. I can tell you, Harding says, how many times people have thanked me for just talking to them. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Aiko Levick, a student at Rochester Institute of Technology and also a member of the OASIS Project's third internship cohort at the Rochester Beacon. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Smriti Jacob and is dated July 29th. CTSI gets more than $29 million in new funding. The University of Rochester Medicine Clinical and Translational Science Institute has landed more than $29 million in new federal funding. The center has received over $157 million in grants for translational research across 2 decades. David Linehan, MD, CEO of the University of Rochester Medical Center and Dean of the School of Medicine and Dentistry, says, for 20 years, CTSI has served a critical infrastructure role for translational science and research at U Rochester Medicine. The CTSI team supports our academic and clinical missions by accelerating lab discoveries to bedside implementation and promoting team science. They will continue to play a pivotal role in achieving our research mission. The latest influx of research dollars came from the National Institute of Health's National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences and the Clinical and Translational Science Awards program. U Rochester is one of more than 60 institutions nationwide that receive CTSA program funding. The new Grants Center on Translational Science, removing research barriers by innovating through artificial intelligence and machine learning and accelerating high-quality clinical trials, officials say. The second area of focus is improving health for all, moving research from bench to bedside, addressing local and national health priorities, and expanding access to cutting-edge clinical trials. Karen Wilson, MD, co-director of CTSI, says, we're showing the research community how translational science can reduce barriers to make research more meaningful for all. Martin Zand, MD, co-director of the center, says the grants will also help fund training and mentorship of up-and-coming scholars. In addition, it will support innovative research projects and offer training and education programs to improve U Rochester's clinical trials workforce. CTSI first received funding in 2006. Since then, it has been working with research teams, community members, and nonprofits. The new grant is expected to bolster the university's ties to rural communities. CTSI is working closely with Common Ground Health and the Center for Community Health and Prevention for these community engagement activities, officials say. Senator Chuck Schumer and Representative Joe Morelli both lauded URochester's research and innovation. The grant continues through 2032. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from managing editor and writer Smriti Jacob, and you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Jacob Schermerhorn and is dated July 30th. A step toward universal child care. New York has taken another step toward creating a universal child care system, and Monroe County is at the forefront. Governor Kathy Hochul has directed $20 million in state funding for the Monroe County Child Care Pilot Program, a 3-year program that has a target of expanding coverage for an additional 1,000 children age 0 to 3, regardless of income level or geographic location in the county. The State Office of Children and Family Services announced some details for the program earlier this month at a presentation in Irondequoit. While universal child care is well established in Nordic countries, movement toward it has been slower in the United States. Last year, New Mexico instituted a no-cost, no-barrier child care system. Hochul has invested over $8 billion in child care since taking office 5 years ago. This year's state budget increased funding for the Child Care Assistance Program by 40% to $3 billion. CCAP, Child Care Assistance Program, is the primary state program that helps low and middle income families pay part or all of their child care. Subsidies are available to families with gross income up to and including 85% of the state median income for their household size. Hochul has set the 2028 to 29 school year as her target for universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds. But the next step of free or low-cost early childhood education from infancy to 3 years old still remains on the horizon. Demia Harris Madden, commissioner of the State Office of Children and Family Services, says, "It can be hard to imagine how we get there. This is what keeps me up at night, trying to figure out what financial tools we need and what we have to do. But I will say that we are on a path." While additional details are yet to be shared, the Monroe County pilot program will deal with the provider side of the child care equation. The county will contract with OCFS licensed child care providers who then file with the state agency for reimbursement. Plans call for applicants to be accepted in late fall or early winter and then start to provide services in 2027. The pilot also requires a $2 million funding match from the local county government. Harris Madden says Monroe County was selected for the pilot program, along with Broome and Dutchess counties, based on what she describes as an already proactive and robust approach toward child care. Rochester Mayor Malik Evans says this investment continues that momentum. And this investment is not just about creating more childcare, but about giving families the support they need to build stable, healthy, and successful lives. Talia Wright, commissioner of the County Department of Human Services, says, "It's an incredible opportunity. We're excited for it, and we have our eyes on the prize." Pete Nabosny, policy director at the Children's Agenda, says the investment is significant. However, he adds, the program rollout must be done correctly, or it risks further emphasizing structural issues that have plagued the childcare system for years. They need to put an emphasis on the selection of providers and have some equity considerations so that this is a program that lower income families will be able to participate in, he says. I think there are ways you can maintain the universal design of the program, but also have equity considerations built in. Rolling out the program. To achieve the universal part of universal child care, plans call for the pilot program to remove traditional barriers, typically related to income. Everyone would be eligible. Harris-Madden says there will be no means testing, no income requirement for the program. It will be truly universal. While this is a positive step, Nabosny says, pitfalls in implementation could occur. Geographical location is one aspect that he believes needs to be carefully considered. According to the OFCS, 58% of census tracts within Monroe were categorized as child care deserts, with the most serious coverage gaps apparent in the western rural suburbs. In comparison, Erie and Onondaga counties both had 64% of census tracts labeled as child care deserts. He says if the pilot is structured in such a way that providers who get selected are in the more affluent suburbs, the families that receive care through this program will probably likely be residents of those communities. In addition, Monroe County has a diverse mixture of child care options, which can be appropriate based on a family's situation. These ranged from home-based family and group family child care options with 6 to 12 slots to a larger daycare centers, which can take as many as 100 children. However, the infrastructure and resources for each of these provider types are not always equal. Smaller operations typically have capacity for grant writing, for example. Nabosny says one of the challenges would be if they make it a very cumbersome request for proposal process. Intentional or not, a complicated process to get into the pilot will steer things toward the larger, more sophisticated providers. Nabosny adds, 1,000 slots is a lot, but there's about 4,500 or so infant toddler seats in child care centers in Monroe County right now. So it's not like every program is going to be included. There's amazing family child care providers. There's amazing center-based programs. So there's a need to make sure they're all able to be included. Finally, the stability offered by this pilot program should also be studied, Nabosny says, including if it helps stabilize families who are at danger of losing child care due to being laid off or having a medical issue preventing them from working. Children do best when they have consistency with child care, so he also supports those already enrolled with a provider to be included in the pilot. In addition, maintaining coverage even after 3 years is important. If the pilot allows for more coverage or workers, disruption could occur if it suddenly goes away. We're going to be looking at these programs very closely, says Harris-Madden. We're very curious to see how this is going to work, but we're very confident that this is the right place to carry this pilot out. As a specific example of Monroe County's strong performance with child care, Harris-Madden cites its administration of CCAP. When New York expanded eligibility for the program in 2022 and 23, skyrocketing demand forced more than half of all counties to institute wait lists or shut down admissions as funding from regional block grants dried up. As of July, 12 counties have waiting lists, while 14 more are not open and without a waiting list. Monroe County is not one of them. In fact, its 16.9% coverage rate of eligible children is in the top 5. Last year, Monroe County had the most CCAP recipients, 7,530 children, outside of New York City, and had comparable numbers to Nassau County, which served 7,327 children. Wright herself credits a combination of factors for her department's success, including a knowledgeable staff, a wide range of experiences across communities in New York, and strong relationships between the city and county governments, as well as at the state level. New York's first focus was on expanding eligibility, an effort that has expanded CCAP's reach by 150%. System capacity still remains an issue, however. For example, while New Mexico's universal child care system has been heralded for the progress it has made with eligibility and access, actually finding care can be difficult. This is true for Monroe County, too. While CCAP does not have a wait list here, a sizable capacity gap exists. As of January, there were 24,981 available child care slots in the county, while there were 45,750 children under age 6. The Monroe County Child Care Pilot Program is designed to be a supply-side solution. However, Nabozny believes underlying causes of the gap must be addressed. One is workforce shortages and turnover. This children's agenda has pointed to low wages as the key part of the problem. The organization says 97.4% of jobs in the region pay more than child care workers. Nabozny cites an anecdote of running into a former child care worker at Chipotle, where she says she takes home more income. Early intervention workers, which include speech-language pathologists, physical therapists, and occupational therapists, are similarly facing shortages. This has delayed delivery of therapies, which can help children with developmental delays and disabilities to meet proficiency standards and compound savings in the K-12 system. Keeping in line with statewide trends, from 2019 to 2024, the number of EI, early intervention, workers in Monroe County has dropped by 25% for speech language and 15% for physical therapy. Reimbursement rates for EI workers have not kept pace with inflation, and the children's agenda, saying that most providers earn less than when the program began in 1994. Older universal child care systems have dealt with the problem in creative ways. Denmark has relatively low capacity for infant, 0 to 1 year old, providers, instead offering much more in family leave. The difference in approaching that is in a place like Denmark, they say, well, we're not going to try to cover the cost of that. We're going to support a year-long paid family leave program. Whereas in New York, it's 12 weeks. That's coming from Mr. Nabozny of the Children's Agenda. You are listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. This last article came from contributing writer Jacob Schermerhorn. Our next article from the Rochester Beacon comes from Will Cleveland, writing on July 30th. Sidor Optics plans $32 million expansion. Sidor Optics will invest more than $32 million to expand its Rochester manufacturing operations, building a new 100,000 square foot facility. The project is expected to create up to 36 jobs over the next 5 years, while retaining 92 existing positions. Empire State Development announced the project Thursday, saying that the family-owned optics manufacturer will construct the new building at its Chili location on Jetview Drive to accommodate growing customer demand and increase production capacity. The company expects the facility to be operational by fall 2027. To support the expansion, ESD, Empire State Development, will provide up to $450,000 in performance-based Excelsior Jobs Program tax credits. The incentive is tied to Sidor Optics creating the new jobs and retaining its current workforce. Founded in 1964, Sidor Optics has grown into a global supplier of precision optical components and custom-engineered products used in the aerospace, defense, semiconductor, biomedical, energy, and entertainment industries. The company specializes in both low-volume custom optics and high-volume production of plano optics, including wafers, windows, filters, mirrors, and optical flats, and operates what it describes as the largest collection of double-sided polishing machines in North America. The expansion follows another major milestone for the company. Earlier this year, Sidor Optics acquired Victor-based Vertex Optics, its first acquisition since the company was founded. The deal expanded Sidor's capabilities into precision curved optics while adding Vertex's roughly 20-person workforce, positioning the combined company to serve increasingly complex aerospace, defense, semiconductor, medical, energy, and automotive customers. The company is also invested in developing the region's optics workforce. The Sidor family recently pledged $3 million toward Monroe Community College's new Advanced Technology Center, which will bear the company's name and is expected to open this fall with hands-on training programs in optics, precision tooling, and other advanced manufacturing fields. James Sidor, the company's chairman, is scheduled to be inducted into the Rochester Business Hall of Fame later this year. He previously served as president of the American Precision Optics Manufacturing Association, and earlier this year received the SPIE President's Award for his contributions to the optics industry. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from contributing writer Will Cleveland, and you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Audra Fitzgerald and is dated July 31st. Our centers offer space for Rochester teens. Typically, during the school year, Rochester's R centers, rec centers, offer a few youth sports leagues and one catch-all after-school program called R Stars. In the summer, as young residents' schedules open up, these recreation centers fill in the gaps with more programming. The city reports a total of 100,000 visits at our center locations over the course of the summer. That number includes attendance in structured programs, events, and use of outdoor green spaces, playgrounds, and spray parks. Kendra Hale, Director of Recreational Center Operations, says, attendance is certainly one measure of success, but it is far from the only one. We also look at participant engagement, program quality, and whether young people are returning because they feel connected and valued. We also value feedback from participants and families, which helps us continually improve our programs and ensure that we're meeting the needs of our community. Teenagers often feel as though they're not welcome in public spaces, according to an Axios report published last month. The report explains that teens without money or access to a car lack places to go. Anti-loitering laws and spending requirements leave teens feeling left out. In the past, this feeling of exclusion has led teenagers organizing large group hangouts via social media, a phenomenon called teen takeovers. These can amass hundreds of attendees. In May, the Rochester Police Department responded to a teen takeover of 400 young people at Ontario Beach, when dozens of young people engaged in physical violence. No arrests were made. Mayor Malik Evans addressed the event at a press conference shortly after the incident. Using these public places, he says, is a privilege and not a right. Neighborhood R centers offer teenagers an alternative space. The R Center summer programs are free for City of Rochester residents. There's a $60 fee for non-city residents. The City of Rochester allocated $4,280,700 for R centers in the 2025 to 26 budget. In the proposed budget for 26 to 27, the city is allocating $4,403,100. According to the budget from this past year, there are 39 full-time city employees designated specifically to R centers and 52 part-time and seasonal employees. Rochester has 12 R centers that are open year-round. There are no locations in Charlotte, where the Ontario Beach incident took place in May. There's also a lack of recreation centers in neighboring Maplewood and Irondequoit, although a new nature center has just opened in Maplewood. Teens can attend a multitude of programs around the city based on their interests. At Hope R Center on Campbell Street, teenagers can participate in weekly sports clinics with a rotating focus on a different sport each week. A few R Center locations offer summer play days, an all-day camp-like program for youth ages 6 to 17. This more open-ended session allows teenagers to hang out at our centers without choosing a specific interest. Teens can participate in coding lessons, outdoor play, and field trips. Biz Kids, with a $sign for the S, is a week-long educational program that teaches youth ages 10 to 17 how to start and run their own businesses. Participants learn how to conduct market research, have real-world opportunities to practice their sales skills, and end the week with a Shark Tank-style business pitch. However, maintaining attendance can prove difficult. This is in part due to older adolescents who may have summer employment or whose parents trust them to stay home during the day. We don't really get a lot of middle or high schoolers for summer play days, Hale says. They're able to get work experience or an internship or something like that. So that's kind of that age where they graduate from coming to camp to having one of those experiences. Isaac Bliss, the city's rec team, worked to offer summer employment and internship opportunities to Rochester teenagers. This summer, the city of Rochester is employing about 300 teenagers in seasonal, part-time, and full-time positions. The city has over 79 partnerships with local workplaces to train teen employees. These partnerships allow Rochester teens a variety of opportunities, including shadowing doctors and surgeons in hospitals, gaining experience in restaurants, and planning events. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Audra Fitzgerald, who's a recent graduate of Ithaca College and a member of the Oasis Project's third cohort. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana and is dated July 31st. Foes protest plan to expand Batavia Detention Center. Opposition to a planned expansion of the Department of Homeland Security Detention Center in Batavia kicked off on July 19th with a demonstration on the city's main street. The demonstration, organized by the Genesee County chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, the Rochester Rapid Response Network, and the GLOW Community Alliance, drew 50 protesters advocating against a planned expansion of the center, formerly known as the Buffalo Service Processing Center. The detention center, only minutes up the road from where the protest was taking place, serves as the main destination for undocumented immigrants detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement in New York. On July 3rd, DHS announced a hard-sided expansion of the facility to include 100 additional beds for detained migrants. Jane Schneider, a protest organizer at the event, said, "Our goal today is just waking up the community because this news really just hit that they're going to expand the detention center." The DHS announcement was made in the wake of a bill signed by Governor Kathy Hochul in May, disallowing contracts between DHS and individual counties to detain undocumented people in local jails and prisons pending hearings, transfer to out-of-state detention centers, and/or deportation. Democrat Tim Kennedy, who represents the 26th Congressional District, has sent a letter to DHS Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen demanding that the department immediately discontinue plans to expand the detention capacity in Batavia. The Batavia facility has been criticized by immigrant advocates for alleged overcrowding, excessive use of solitary confinement, and lack of medical care for the detainees. According to the DHS, the overcrowding issue is compounded by the recent legislation by Hochul. However, advocates are skeptical that an expansion will improve conditions, arguing that it will only enable larger ICE operations in the region. As of July 9th, the facility housed an average of 698 detained immigrants, down from a peak of 745 in February, but still exceeding its capacity of 650 people. At an information meeting on Wednesday, organized by those organizations in the protest, a small group of activists, organizers, and immigration law experts discussed the reported conditions inside the Batavia Detention Center and potential avenues for stopping the planned expansion. Similar efforts are underway in Rochester, where Customs and Border Protection plans to construct a detention center inside the Keating Federal Building in downtown Rochester. The Batavia Detention Center was built in the 1990s as an Immigration and Naturalization Service facility before ownership was transferred to DHS following its creation in 2003 in the wake of the September 11th attacks. It remains the only DHS detention center in New York and is one of only 10 detention centers nationwide owned and operated by DHS, which normally contracts with private prison companies to manage its facilities or uses county and state facilities to house detained immigrants. New York does not allow privately run prison facilities and now no longer allows ICE to work with individual counties to detain people in local jails and prisons. DHS has not yet released further information on the project, its goals, or its timeline. The agency did not respond to a request for comment. Some reports indicate the expansion will serve as a women's wing for the center, which is currently a men's-only facility. Earlier, female detainees captured in New York would be held in county jails and prisons before being transferred to larger facilities out of state. Both male and female detainees are often transferred to out-of-state facilities in Ohio, Louisiana, and Colorado, a move with which immigrant advocates argue limits contact between detained people and their loved ones and legal counsel. A Wayne County farm worker and advocate, Dolores Bustamante Romero, was transported to a detention facility in Louisiana following her detainment in April at ICE offices in Buffalo. According to a court testimony during her May 26th hearing, Bustamante was not informed of where she was going, nor was she allowed to contact family members until after her arrival in Louisiana. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana, and you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Jacob Schermerhorn and is dated August 4th. Golisano Institute focusing on graduate excellence. Leadership at the Golisano Institute for Business and Entrepreneurship believes a strong foundation has been laid for their school, which starts its fourth year in September. Since opening as an alternative to traditional business schools, the Golisano Institute has had 2 graduating classes at its site in Rochester and will soon have another class up and running in Buffalo. The school offers 2-year certificates for business and entrepreneurship, as well as shorter programs for AI and business and strategic AI implementation. Tuition is $8,900, with small cohorts currently made up of about 30 students. The school's current focus is not expansion, but instead on proving excellent graduate outcomes through job placements and alumni success. President Ian Mortimer says 86% of its first cohort are fully employed at businesses as entrepreneurs or as founders, making at least $4,000 a month. I think those numbers are very much in line with our expectations, he says. In fact, I think there's one area that we're overachieving, and that would be job placement. That's one of the things with a non-traditional program. That's now that our graduates are going into the workforce and we can share the success stories of them, it's going to make a lot easier to be very candid. Most people are smart enough to understand that they want to see evidence that this new model is effective. We have lots of evidence now, and it's just a matter of articulating it. One such piece of evidence is Jack Carney, one of the Institute's roughly 50 graduates, and a recent speaking from experience keynote speaker at the school. Reflecting on his own journey, Carney admits he had some uncertainty about his plans after high school graduation. In fact, he originally heard of the school through a Facebook ad from his grandmother. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at all. I was going to go into construction at MCC, but I did come for an interview at the Golisano Institute. The place was all under construction. I was a little skeptical, I guess. But Carney says he was hooked by the description of the program itself and the passion of the staff he met. He felt it offered a chance to jump into the business world immediately by mimicking those same conditions while studying. He signed up the same day as his interview. Carney went on to intern at Hertzfeld Advisors, a Miami-based investment firm. He was hired by the company following his internship based on elements preached by the Golisano Institute, says Thomas Morgan, Chief Operating Officer of Hertzfeld Advisors. Morgan still remembers Carney's answer to an interview question, one he calls the single best answer he ever heard. I said to him, "Jack, how do you feel you're going to compete with the other interns that are all from elite four-year colleges?" And he said, "Well, the question is, how are they going to compete with me? I've been working hard for 2 years, honing my skills, while they're going to frat parties and they're taking English Lit. I feel like I've built the skill set and I'm ready to do it," says Morgan. I was immediately just like, I've got to have this kid. That experience convinced Hertzfeld Advisors to help fund student relocation costs. I think the premise of the institution, says Morgan of Hertzfeld Advisors, which is to educate people at a reasonable cost so that they don't come out of there with $100,000 of debt and they can start their business careers, I think that's very laudable. The Rochester building at Westfall Road has slowly but consistently grown its student body. It currently has about 200 students, with the goal of eventually reaching 450. Capacity at the former Buffalo News building in downtown Buffalo will be similarly sized, says Mortimer. The expansion into Buffalo was driven by a variety of factors, including building availability and a connection to the city by 2 Institute board members and Tom Golisano himself. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Jacob Schermerhorn, and you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. And our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Audra Fitzgerald and is dated August 5th. After 30 years, New York style is still in fashion. Helen and Kevin Knight first met at Beverly's, a popular Rochester bar at the corner of Avenue D and Conkey Avenue. They loved to listen to live reggae music at local dance halls and were known by other patrons for wearing stylish clothes. Sharni Knight, the couple's daughter, says, "Everybody would see their cool outfits and say, 'I want that. Where did you get that?' They were the original influencers." In 1996, the Knights turned their love of fashion into a business, launching a boutique called New York Style. Since then, the couple has spent 3 decades dressing Rochesterians in fashionable, unique pieces. Everybody who knew the Knights as fashion icons could now buy their clothes. New York Style at the corner of Monroe Avenue and Meg Street isn't like other clothing stores. The Knights, who are also the store's only 2 employees, are essentially personal stylists. People will call me and say, "My birthday's coming up and I'm going to wear this color hair," Helen Knight says, and I'll search for a birthday outfit for them. I once helped a customer find a wedding dress the day of, Sharni Knight says. When they first opened, Helen would buy 2 or 3 of the same items during shopping trips to New York City so that she could wear one and sell the extras at the store. Now she sources most of the store's inventory from wholesalers in Los Angeles. Other items like jewelry and accessories still come from shopping trips to New York City. Certain custom items are bought from designers. Kevin Knight designs the elaborate display cases. He's also a seamster, frequently mending and altering clothing as needed. Sharni Knight, the couple's youngest child, began posting videos on Instagram and Facebook to promote the store. These videos all start the same way, with the phrase, "Hey, stylistas." Social media has proved to be a great marketing tool for the Knights, with more and more people recognizing the family from the videos. The business now partners with content creators to grow its presence online. New York Styly also partners with a promotion team to sell tickets to festivals and concerts. This allows customers to buy tickets to events and then shop for their outfits at the same place. The store's busiest night for sales is New Year's Eve, with many customers often buying their outfit just hours before the ball drops. However, Helen Knight has noticed that those busy days have been happening more often as more businesses pop up on and around Monroe Avenue. "We're getting a lot of new people passing through the neighborhood," she says, "and that's bringing in new people for us." The community of small businesses on Monroe has been a huge part of their experience running the store. They are in a text chain with other business owners of Monroe to look out for each other. Once, when someone smashed the display window at New York Styly, the other business owners alerted Helen Knight and then waited outside of the store for her. The group also organizes collaborative shopping events like sidewalk sales and second Saturdays that multiple businesses participate in. It's fitting that the Knights will celebrate the anniversary of the business by dancing to reggae music, just as they did when they started out 30 years ago. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Audra Fitzgerald, who's a recent graduate of Ithaca College and a member of the Oasis Project's 3rd internship cohort. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana and is dated August 5th. Council members approve funding but disagree on what caused delay. 6 weeks after a proposal to provide funding for refugee service organizations fell short of City Council approval, the measure passed unanimously. Approval of the $125,000 expenditure was delayed, Councilmember Stanley Martin contends, in retaliation for her vote in May against the city's proposed sale of School 29 to Roxy Academy. However, some of the council members who voted against discharging the measure from committee on June 16th said they had other concerns. Martin says that after working with her fellow council members on the ordinance with a provision to help fund refugees helping refugees, mental health education, and legal code for refugee rights, and Rochester Refugee Resettlement Services, she was informed by Council President Miguel Melendez that some of her colleagues were unwilling to support the funding. At a June 16th meeting, the measure was not discharged from committee after a 4-5 vote, with council members Mary Lupine, Stanley Martin, Bridget Monroe, and Kiara Smith voting in favor. Opposed were Melendez and council members Mitch Gruber, Lachey Harris, LaShunda Leslie Smith, and Michael Patterson. A stormy discussion broke out after the failed vote. A vote on the proposed sale of School 29 by the city to Roxai Academy, whose students currently share a building with Bishop Kearney High School in Irondequoit, was tabled in May after Martin, Lupien, and Smith voiced opposition. The sale remains tabled following the council's July 28th meeting. Council members opposed the sale of the empty School 29 building to Roxai, arguing that the request for proposals process, when the city allows community members to propose specific uses for city-owned properties on the market, should follow a housing-first approach, rather than focusing on selling properties as quickly as possible. Council members in favor of selling the building to Roxai say that the charter school needs its own facility and that the city needs money from the sale and cannot afford to maintain the building until a viable housing proposal is made. Gruber, chair of the Budget Committee, who worked with Martin on amending the ordinance, responded directly to her during the June 16th meeting. He pointed to a lack of clarity on what the city would ask the refugee service organizations to use the funding for. Other concerns were how funds were being distributed among the three organizations and the need for more time to write up contracts with the organization. For his part, Patterson, in favor of the sale of the school to Roxai, said he would offer no apology to anyone for advocating for the 130 children that are City of Rochester residents that attend Roxai. These are our kids. They need to go to school in our community. Martin originally proposed providing funds to RHR, a refugee services organization. Later, the ordinance was amended to include several other organizations. This funding is going to allow Refugees Helping Refugees, and I believe the other two organizations that received funding, help migrants navigate our broken housing system, said Grant Marthinson, RHR chairperson. So, organizations like Refugees Helping Refugees, when they have sufficient funding to provide housing assistance and other critical support, are able to help some of our community members make that work a little better. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from contributing writer David Wazana, and you've been listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. My name is Jan Heineman. Thank you for listening today, and I hope you have a chance to listen again in the future.